Hi there, my name is Hannah Gannon, and today I am going to be talking about a very fascinating topic, and that is the treatment of Parkinson's disease with a medication that's called carbidopa. Now, before I begin, I did want to talk about a really fascinating technique that's used across many disciplines in the scientific community, and that is called X-ray crystallography. Now, the main goal of X-ray crystallography is to obtain a three-dimensional image of any type of molecule that you're interested in. So it might be like an enzyme or something like that. Now, this kind of works first by obtaining a very high concentration of a purified sample of whatever you're kind of looking at. And you're going to actually crystallize that sample. And after you crystallize it, you are going to expose it to an X-ray beam. Now, as a result of being exposed to the X-ray beam, it's going to diffract into many different ways and patterns, and a specialist or a crystallographer in this case would produce they'd be able to produce a three-dimensional image from a what's called an electron density map that's going to be generated based on like angles and intensities. So, as you can see from this picture, we've got this crystal right here, and then the diffraction pattern that's going to be generated after you expose it to the X-ray, and then the electron density map, and then as a result you get this really cool protein model that's three-dimensional. And so, as many of us are familiar with in the medical community, a lot of different molecules that you look at, we often say, it's commonly known as like structure, or structure leads to function. And so I think that that's something that's really makes this a very, very powerful tool, as you're able to generate the exact three-dimensional structure of any type of molecule that you're interested in to look at. And so once you're able to generate that structure, you in turn are able to, have these hints and ideas about the possible function of that. And so one type of application is to use this in a way of being able to, in turn, as a result, you're gonna be able to look at, medications possibly. And so you're able to look at like the active site of, enzymes, and maybe how a medication is gonna modify that active site. And that's actually what has been done. Many cases. We're going to look at a very specific case, and it's actually going to be with the medication of interest today, which is going to be carbidopa. And we're going to look at carbidopa in the active site of an enzyme, and carbidopa is actually going to function as a peripheral DDC inhibitor. So the enzyme is called peripheral DDC, and carbidopa is actually going to function to inhibit that enzyme. Now, I will show you kind of a model of how this looks, and so I hope you're able to see it on the screen, but right here we've got this structure right here. That's actually going to be the carbidopa. Now, if I zoom out, as you can see, I can kind of turn this around. This is fascinating. So now you can kind of see like these alpha helices and these beta pleated sheets, and these are all different forms, or different secondary structures of proteins. And so that's gonna be like more of the protein structure, whereas like I showed you earlier exactly where the carbidopa was going to be located within the active site of this enzyme. And so now going forward, let's talk a little bit about what carbidopa does, and how it can help try to alleviate some of the symptoms of patients that are suffering from Parkinson's disease. But first, let's talk a little bit about what Parkinson's is. Now, Parkinson's is a condition that results from neurons breaking down or dying. And neurons are actually nerve cells, and so they're located in the brain, and also some of them are located in the brain. And so Parkinson's disease can be classified as a progressive nervous system disorder. And the main, symptom, or a lot of the symptoms that result actually occur because of a result of low dopamine. And dopamine is a really important neurotransmitter. And so because these nerve cells are dying off, or breaking down in the brain, you're going to have a decrease in dopamine, and as a result, you're going to have a lot of issues with movement, as we will see as we look at the symptoms. So initially, you might notice what's called like a tremor first with like one hand, and you can kind of see this in the picture here, the asymmetrical resting tremor. And then over time, you're going to progressively notice more and more changes, like speech changes, movement problems, rigid muscles. And then here we've got what's called, it's known as the Parkinson gait. And so that's another really notable feature in patients who suffer from Parkinson's disease. Now, unfortunately, Parkinson's cannot be cured. However, a lot of the medications that are currently being used for these patients, they work towards alleviating a lot of the symptoms that do progress and trying to help those patients as much as possible. And a lot of times they do aim at increasing the overall dopamine amount, because you are initially having a decrease of that from those nerve cells dying off. So that's kind of the end goal. A lot of these medications is trying to increase that dopamine amount. Now, we will look at a couple medications here. So like I said, most of them aim at increasing the dopamine concentration for patients. The first medication that I just want to talk about just really briefly is what's called levodopa. And this is actually one of the most commonly used medications to treat Parkinson's disease. And it kind of functions by being absorbed in the intestines, and it's then going to be, it's going to travel to the brain where it's actually converted into dopamine. And so I thought that was pretty fascinating. That's why I kind of wanted to include it, because I think that having that basic understanding will better help us learn about the function of carbidopa, which is our main medication of interest. So carbidopa is actually going to work to enhance the effect of levodopa, and it does so by preventing the conversion of levodopa to dopamine until it reaches the brain, so that levodopa is being converted to dopamine in the brain. Another really awesome thing about carbidopa is that it actually reduces the severity of a lot of the side effects from the medication levodopa. And so carbidopa. Carbidopa reduces the severity of a lot of the side effects of levodopa, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And some of these side effects include, nausea or vomiting. So carbidopa really helps with that as well. So, in summary, X-ray crystallization or crystallography is a really fascinating tool that we can kind of have under our belt, and it allows us to detect the three-dimensional structure of macromolecules. And in this case we looked at an enzyme, and specifically the active site, and we're able to kind of see how this medication works in that active site, and in turn we can learn more about the function by examining the structure. And so as today we saw how carbidopa, we saw the structure and the function, and kind of how it just helps alleviate some of those symptoms that that patients with Parkinson's disease suffer from. So I did also want to point out that this is the structure of carbidopa as well. So lastly, I just wanted to briefly show the sources that I used to gather the information for today's slideshow. Thank you for taking the time to watch. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.